Good. Ted Weber, correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much for agreeing to join me today for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for the invite.
Hey, not a
Um,
problem. So, tell me, where are you at in the world?
I'm in Annapolis, Maryland.
Ah, no kidding. I was actually born in Bethesda, Maryland. You,
Okay, that's Montgomery County.
are you a Navy guy?
No, I'm not. But Annapolis is the capital, and I got a job here with the State Department of Natural Resources when I moved here. That's why
Natural
I
resource.
ended up moving here. I actually grew up in South Florida, but I have relatives here. My wife lives here. Is from Maryland.
I grew up in Pasco County, Florida, just north of Tampa.
So. Okay.
Where's your South Florida at?
Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale. Okay, I've been there. It's not bad. It's on the Atlantic side, very wavy. Not,
Yeah.
I like the golf. I think the golf is wonderful. I really miss it a lot, to tell you the truth. I'm up here in New York. I miss a lot of things nowadays. Are you guys experiencing the pandemic pretty hard down there in Annapolis? Or are you weathering it pretty good?
We've come out of it, I think. Well, we've sort of come out of it. We're not on lockdown anymore. And our governor actually was very responsive, and he showed very good leadership, unlike the federal government, and we weathered it reasonably well.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And now there's word coming out that the poor guy in the White House was lying the whole time and doesn't know what he's doing. And it's like, my God, I wouldn't want the job. I never would run for office in a million years. You just have the spotlight on you and whatnot. I mean, I guess you're in government. Would you actually consider running and being a part of the decision making, or do you like being kind of a cog, being twisted left and right?
I'm actually not. I don't work for the government anymore. I left quite a while ago, like 15 years ago. So I work for a nonprofit now.
Oh, okay. And it gives you more time to do the writing thing?
It's about the same amount of time. I actually wasn't writing when I worked for the government, except for nonfiction.
Nonfiction? What kind of nonfiction?
I'm just writing papers for scientific journals and reports, things like that. Ecology. Trained as an ecologist, so I
That's
do a lot of
fascinating.
ecology stuff.
So
And
you would consider yourself a scientist.
yeah,
Are you a fantasy writer or science fiction writer? I mean, I know you write under speculative fiction, but what would you call yourself?
more science fiction, but um, also alternate history. And the book that I'm working on now, that I'm nearly finished with the first draft, is not speculative fiction at all, really. It's a satire of local government based on my interactions with the county and city government and state government over the years.
You would call that alternative history. You're writing historical facts, but with
That particular book isn't. That's just like a straight up satire, like Carl Hyacin, that sort of book. Carl Hyacin being from South Florida, and he even went to my high school way before I did. But so he's I like his writing a lot. But most of my cyberpunk trilogy that's been published, the final book that's coming out on October 1st. Those are near future science fiction. I would classify them as cyberpunk. And you can also classify them as techno thrillers.
techno thrillers. So in your mind, we don't get through this. We end up in a worse place with cyberpunks. I
Yeah.
like I like the idea of Akira, that Japanese anime with the bike.
Yeah, that was a classic. Great stuff.
That's what I think of immediately. Alternative history is one of my favorite subjects. In terms of being able to write it too, just making up your facts and kind of just going from there. Excuse me,
Yeah.
sir. Thank you. My son is peeking into the room. I have to tell him to skedaddle real quick. What's your favorite subject in alternative history? What
My
do you like
favorite
to subjects
subject, or
yeah.
well, the books that I've written. Well, one is kind of in limbo. I finished first draft, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it now. Asks the question, what if civilization was changed from the very beginning by unknown entities that have taught people to be better stewards and get along with each other better, and sort of instilled that in the deep roots of civilization. There are theories that of like structural history that the like everyday events and year-to-year events are like the froth on the waves. Then the cyclical things like economies are like the waves themselves. And then the deep ocean currents, those are the structures of societies and civilizations that change very slowly. So that's the sort of level that I was looking at. And then
Like
the
the
other,
I love the ooh, horrible echo. Hold on a second. Sometimes the system has a hard time catching up. I love the idea of humanity coming from something else, right? Something spawning what we are today and kind of developing it into. Like, I mean, I guess you're talking about hand fasting in a way. Kind of, they're guiding us. These entities, am I right?
yes, they're called guardians, and um, uh, they have a specific origin and past that uh, they sort of find out about towards they find out most of it at the end of the book. And I'm working on a prequel as to like where they come from and why they do what they do. But the premise of the novel, and it's really long, like epic, like, and that's why I haven't decided what I'm going to do with it, because they're hard to sell. Is that the Guardians have left and say, well, you're ready to be on your own, but then there's a disruption, a massive volcanic eruption, sort of blankets the sun for 2 years and causes massive crop failures and starvations. And
That's happened, right? That's
it has
absolutely
happened
100,
in
yeah,
history.
100%. And
And
they actually say that 1199, the Dark Ages, like the year before it started, was a gigantic volcanic eruption that cascaded the entire European, Asian continent into an ice age, basically.
and
Caused the dark
that's exactly what this is based on.
started the dark plague, started these wars. I mean, I don't know. I guess the Roman Empire was very warlike, but you picture these resource wars after the Dark Ages, where they were trying to survive, weren't you?
Yeah, and people are actually eating each other. They're actually
Oh yeah.
being some cannibals roaming around. It's a
I mean,
pretty
that's
grisly times.
we've done that before too, right? I mean, this is very human to survive at
Yeah.
any cost, and then living with it afterward. Did anybody survive the party that tried to cross the Rocky
Oh, the
Mountains?
Donner Party.
Did anybody survive that, or they just found the remnants and made up the story?
Yeah, I think that there were some survivors, but I don't remember how many.
Yeah, people actually live with that memory in their heads. They had to
Yeah.
sustain themselves off human flesh. What a nightmare. So I mean, you are. It's interesting because you say alternative history, but it kind of sounds like you could call yourself full-fledged science fiction with that,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
And then
you
well,
have
the other alternate history book I wrote is more like straight up alternate history. Asks the question. So there actually was a plot to overthrow Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 30s. Was called the business plot. And these right-wing business entities were not happy about the way FDR was taking the country, and they hired this Marine general to round up these disaffected veterans of World War I and overthrow Roosevelt. So do a coup, and they were inspired by fascist movements in Europe. So my novel takes as its premise that the coup was successful, and then it looks at what the U.S. is like 50 years later, and it shows it through the eyes of a 19-year-old farm kid whose brother has just died in one of the country's wars, and he gets involved in this resistance movement, and things go rapidly downhill and bad.
Well, I imagine, right? I mean, you can't have a fascist movement without there being kind of a crack that occurs. It happens all over the
Right.
place. I mean, once you have like a dictator, his power will eventually disintegrate. I love The Death of Stalin. Have you watched that movie or read that book? The actual guy, the dictator who dies, he has a stroke and he's laying on the ground, just basically almost dead for days, and nobody wants to
Yeah.
touch him for fear that there'll be revenge. It's so
Yeah.
comical. It's so
Yeah.
comical. This strong guy is, peeing himself and he can't do anything. He's dying and his entire kingdom just goes away. It's fascinating. So, I mean, do you have a dictator in your novel? Do you write about the actual personality, the cult of the personality?
Um, I do a little bit so not in that book, because it's from the point of view, it's a more local point of view. It's all set in Southern Illinois, which is a place I used to live in between Florida and Maryland. And so it's locally set, but it's a microcosm of what's going on in the whole world. So my cyberpunk books, the cyberpunk trilogy, by the time it gets to the third book, we are in the main antagonist's head. So so if you think of a video game where you start out fighting the lower, I guess the lower henchmen, and then the higher henchmen, and finally you fight the big boss. So it's organized. It's kind of like that, where they have to sort of work their way up and come back from all their setbacks and so forth. But yeah, so there's two main antagonists. One is the president, but the main antagonist, his name is Bob Luxmore, and he's the CEO of Media Corporation, or Media. And he has formed this company out of Silicon Valley, pretty much from scratch. He sort of bought his way into one of those, like a Silicon Valley startup, and he rapidly expands it, and then he works out these deals with government officials and spreads some money around. And his vision is to upgrade the internet to make it hacker proof and much, much faster, and create a shared virtual reality that will benefit all of humanity. That'll bring humanity into the next stage.
You
So
must be
he has like some altruistic goals.
Yeah, well, they all do,
The
don't
way
they?
he goes about it,
They all do.
makes him a villain.
It's amazing, right? I mean, they all have this altruistic kind of quirk to them where they want to do the good. I mean, if
Right.
Hitler had said, we're killing all the Jews for no other reason just to kill them, nobody would have gone along with it. He actually said, we're doing this for the betterment of humanity. And people went, okay, let's do it. It's amazing. Can't wait to see what happens, buddy. You
sad,
as
actually.
Oh yeah, terribly sad, terribly sad. History is an amazing sad place, and as a person like yourself, you're looking at a situation now where you can kind of see maybe the roots being built into the ground, can't you? I mean, does you write apocalyptic futures? You see one developing now or not?
Um, I have hopes that things will turn around, but we'll see in November.
But this is how it works, doesn't it? Like throughout history, you
Yeah.
have this guy that plays these games.
All right. We're lucky, actually, that Trump is not very competent. He's not very good. I think he has authoritarian tendencies, and
Oh
he
yeah.
would gladly be. He's even said that he admires strong dictators, and he would like to be one himself. And he has spoken with admiration of Mussolini, but he's just not very competent. If he were, then it would be much scarier.
Yeah, it's never the guy that you think it is, though, is it? I mean, even going back to our Hitler point, he was the guy doing the
Yeah,
dangling.
people laughed at Hitler. They thought he was ridiculous, and then.
But he was hiding behind somebody else, right? The what was the guy's name? The actual chancellor.
Ludendorff, I think.
Ludendorff, or whoever the guy was who was actually in charge, who died, who took over the spot.
Right.
I mean, there's always a person who gets the you know, the magnet who attracts the attention, and then you're not aware of what's happening behind the scenes. It's unfortunate in terms of like a story developer. You just can't help but wonder what's going to happen going forward. When did you write your alternate history or your cyberpunk stories?
I started them in 2012.
Okay.
So I started the first book, Sleep State Interrupt, in 2012. And so it's set in the near future. I don't say exactly when it is, but it's at that transition between some classic cyberpunk as people, you know, jack into directly into their brains, and they jack into the net and do stuff in the net. This is more, so it was that when I wrote the first book, it was before there was successful virtual reality. Now, of course, they do have commercial VR headsets.
Have you messed with it?
Oculus,
Have you
Oculus.
played with it? Did you play?
I have.
Have you? Did you like it? I've never played. I've never even put it on my
I
own.
do. It's pretty cool. I actually did for the first book, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, an interview in virtual reality. So it was, and then so people came in their avatars, and so that was pretty interesting.
Is it what do you think it's going to develop into what you think it's going to develop into, or is it kind of just more of a thing right now? You think it could become something bigger?
I think it's just a matter of time. So in my books, the internet's been replaced with it's been upgraded with much faster fiber optic lines and switching systems. So it's like it's at least 1 million times faster than what we have now. And and then the machines are a lot faster too. So that gives enough bandwidth where you can have virtual reality that looks like reality.
Quantum computing, right? You can't.
They're at the cusp of quantum computing. So
have to have it to have that happen. I think it has to be able to do more than one computation at one time.
They're also MediaCorp is starting to develop these brain interfaces that they put inside your head, and then they grow neurons. So they have this artificial intelligence sort of, it's like a flexible piece that they put inside the skull, and then they grow neurons that interface with the brain neurons, so that way they can communicate as if it were part of the brain. And then you've got an antenna at the neck, just below your skin on the neck. But the reason you have to have it inside the skull is because if you have electrodes on the outside of your skull, it's too thick and you can't get a good signal. So Elon Musk has just released I don't know if you saw his
rabbit. Was it a rabbit or a pig? It was a pig.
Yeah, so he just has created a brain chip also that you can that you would put inside the head, and then but you would do an operation and just create this sort of plug, and then you could update it just by taking out the plug.
What happened? What was the deal with the animal? Do you remember? He had an animal, a pig, or was it a rabbit?
Yes.
Was it a pig? And nothing happened, right? He didn't really demonstrate that he had any control over that animal, or that the animal had any control over something exterior to itself.
The way the demo worked is that they showed the output of the brain probes in terms of waveforms so they were connected to the pig's snout to its sense of smell. So whenever it smelled something, then it peaked, so it produced electrical peaks. So it was very primitive. So it's like a proof of concept. It's still
exciting. I mean, I don't know. Would you be willing to volunteer for something like that? Would you be one of the first people in line to have something put into your brain to augment your perceptions?
Oh hell no! I would wait for. Well, I would wait for at least the bugs to be worked out. So in my books, So they, by the time of Zero Day Rising, they've like really done a lot of testing, and so they've located their facility in Haiti, and they've arranged for a coup to install a friendly government that would allow them whatever they want, and then keep people out, keep people from nosing in their laboratories. And so they recruit local Haitians who are desperate for the money, and they
But
test on them. And not a lot of the tests have bad side effects, like really bad side effects.
you know what I find really fascinating is that you started this your cyberpunk story in 2012, right? That's Obama's beginning of Obama's second term, right? We should have been in
Right.
utopia at that particular point in time, but we weren't really. There was like this political hell developing in Washington where you had a president that couldn't do anything. We had the Senate being the right wing, and they were stopping all progress. And the same thing's happening now.
Right.
Um, and I mean, you could honestly say the beginning of the takeover was happening then. The lies and the corruption coming from the evangelicals or whatnot. You could point your finger and potentially find your telecommunications honcho guy, couldn't you? In like a what's this, Roger Ailes or whatever that guy's name was, the Fox News
Yeah.
person. Even Donald Trump wanted to have a media empire. They said that he was planning on losing the election and becoming a TV person who owned a cable channel. Absolutely
Yeah, I
insane.
think that he was kind of surprised that he won.
I think we all were.
Yes. So it was sort of a mandate on Hillary Clinton's unlikability and the DNC's corruption.
She was horrible. She was a horrible candidate. I mean, unfortunately, I don't think that's why she lost. I don't think she lost that way. I think the Comey thing was interesting too. Like the week before the election, came in, oh, we're going to investigate these emails. Really? Now?
I blame the Republican Party they had like 24 or so candidates running for president, and then we got Trump out of that.
Yeah, what a horrible pool of candidates. My God, there was not one single person with a backbone there that could stand up to this bully.
Well, they tried to, but he just knocked them off one after
Just
the time,
knocked them off.
one after another.
And
So
they're saying that it might be substance abuse, right? I mean, they're saying that he has these nasal decongestives that might give him an amazing advantage because they're uppers or whatever, or
I
lower
haven't
blood.
heard that.
There's all types of stuff, right? And I do find it interesting that you're writing about a shadow guy too. Do you like the
Sort of.
term, right? Because you
So
don't really.
he's sort of. I mean, so Bob Luxmore is. He's not really in the shadows per se. It's just that he doesn't do a lot of interviews until after the first book, when his PR people tell him he has to, because the main character Whaley has exposed the conspiracy between MediaCorp and the government, and their stock drops, and so he has to go out and repair the company image. So so the final book, there's an interview with him on the BBC that's kind of interesting, that goes into his backstory a little bit.
So is he your guy? Like when you're thinking about your stories going forward, are you wrapping them around his history and his futures and his desires, and then playing your protagonists off of him?
No, so the way I write books is I start out with just an idea. So in this case, I'm a big cyberpunk fan. I like a lot of different genres, but I wanted to write something in the cyberpunk genre, and I wanted to set it locally, and the first book set in Baltimore. And then I've really been concerned about the decline of journalism and the concentration of media companies and the threats that those pose to independent thought and democracy. So those are some
Me
things
too.
that I was thinking about. And
Mm.
so the next thing I typically do when writing is then create a what if try to phrase it as a what if statement, like what if one company took over the internet and was able to use that to buy up other companies and use the internet backbone to control the content and then basically control almost all information. So what would the world look like after that? And then another thing that fascinates me is the hero's journey, and
Of
especially
course.
what makes an ordinary person become a hero. So most thrillers are written about people that start out with these, uh, you know, abilities, like they're superheroes, or they're cops, or they're elite soldiers. So those are interesting to read about, but I find it more interesting personally to read about um, normal people that are thrust into
Abnormal.
situations where they're way above their head and
Abnormal situations. Yeah,
wondering,
absolutely. Absolutely.
and how is it going to change them, and how are they going to adapt to overcome these challenges.
What do you think about where we're at right now in terms of media control of information? Do you think that there is, 'cause, I mean, I don't watch TV. I don't watch that at all. I
I
do
don't
not,
watch much TV myself
right?
either.
So, I mean, I cut the cord. There's no cable news. I just get all my information from the internet, and I'm constantly clicking and opening up terms and blah, 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 blah. Do you think that the individual can win against misinformation? Or do you think that we're just kind of stymied because all the information that we get is sullied by potential lies and corruption?
And it takes a group effort. So in the book, Whaley Freed, she's a journalist for the Baltimore Herald. It's based on the Baltimore Sun, which is the real paper there. But she's pretty young. She's 27, but she's a musician too. And because she's a musician, they stick her on a nightlife section, and she tries to write real stories, and the editors kind of poo-poo it and say, just stick to your beat, stay in your lane, that sort of thing. And she digs up some dirt. Her boyfriend is a hacker, and they dig up some dirt about MediaCorp and their uh, how they took over the internet, and how they worked with government officials behind the scenes, and the corruption involved. And so MediaCorp bought the newspaper and fired her. And then they
Right.
also bought the only independent news station, which her boyfriend worked for, and they bought the building, forced them out of business, and got rid of the whole thing. So
And you almost didn't even need to write this story post 2016. That's exactly what happened, wasn't it? We lost control of the internet. The corporations came in and stole it from us. They actually do
uh,
control everything now. If you go
yeah,
on Twitter, it's completely corporate news. You go on Facebook, completely biased towards one way or the other. You go on Reddit, the same thing. There's just information being funneled out of these machines. And I mean, I was actually going to ask, there's no beat reporters anymore, right? There's nobody out there actually writing stories about
there
neighborhoods and cities.
there are, but the corporations are getting rid of it. So my local newspaper here in Annapolis is the Capital Gazette. So the original Gazette was around in the 1700s, and they actually were one of the first papers to publish the Declaration of Independence. That tells you how old they are.
Yeah,
And they've been a continuous newspaper since the mid 1800s. It's one of the oldest newspapers in the country.
mm,
But they were bought out by the Tribune Company out of
mm-hmm.
Chicago, and the Baltimore Sun was also bought by the Tribune Company. And one of my favorite, the City Paper, which was our entertainment newspaper, they were also bought, and they were disbanded. And now they are the so the Tribune Company found millions of dollars to pay their shareholders in dividends, but they at the same time they cut salaries, they cut positions by a third, and they eliminated our local paper entirely. They closed the office and said they're reporters could either work out of the Baltimore Sun offices or they could work from home.
That's
And
sad. Well, how sad? Who owns the Tribune?
I don't know if you heard about the massacre where this guy who was radicalized by, the fake news went in and on a shooting rampage and murdered 5 people and would have killed more people if the police hadn't arrived quickly. So this is the same paper. So they went through this horrible experience. They worked out of one of the reporters' trucks so that they would still put out a paper. Chase Cook, one of the reporters, said, "We're putting out a damn paper today, no matter what." So, but the Tribune Company, being all they care about is their corporate profits and their bottom line, they don't care about the news at all. So they are getting rid of the paper.
Yeah, it's all about media. It's all about those eyeballs. I'm wondering, Chicago Tribune, I'm going to look it up unless you know already. Who owns them all together? Is it Murdoch?
No, they are the
Not?
Tribune Company. I don't think anyone owns the Tribune Company. I know the Koch brothers tried to buy it at one point, but I don't think anyone else owns it. The Washington Post, you probably know, is owned by Amazon now, but Jeff
Yeah.
Bezos has been pretty hands-off.
Well, there's also a giant paywall. It's very interesting. There's paywalls around these certain newspapers like the Los Angeles Times now, the New York Times, the Post. I mean, where you want to get your more liberal news, you can't because there's a paywall. You can only read 2 or 3 articles a month. But if you want to read as many New York Post articles as you want, you can swim in the filth that newspaper puts out every single freaking day. It's absolutely annoying. Every single bit of it. You want the Sun? You got the Sun. No limits at all. But if you want fact-based journalism, you're not going to get it because there's a paywall. That's a conspiracy. That is the control. I don't know. Yeah, the Tribune Publishing Company is what they're called.
Right.
And I'm still looking to see who owns it. I mean, you got Murdoch that does the same exact thing. The guy owns the New York Post. He owns Fox News. He owns the narrative, this bullshit scare-face narrative that causes problems. There was the guy who shot went to the synagogue, whatever the hell his name was. You know what I mean, though? He shot during a service and he killed X number of people. He was radicalized by misinformation that he gleaned from the internet off sites like Bright or whatever the hell it is. It's like, how can you even write fiction anymore when the fact is almost as strange as fiction can possibly ever get?
Yeah,
this is absolutely bizarre.
Yeah.
So I mean, do you find yourself frustrated that reality is beating you in terms of thinking of really awesome scenarios?
That's the trouble with writing near future science fiction, is that eventually it becomes alternate history.
Yeah.
So since I also write alternate history, I could just well, this was future science fiction.
Yeah.
And just consider it alternate history.
Yeah, that's totally right. I mean,
so
you could just say in 5 years.
is the weirdest year.
Oh my God!
No one could have predicted any of it.
Nobody
predicted any of this stuff.
Well, maybe the Aztecs or the Mayans. They thought 2012 was going to be it, and they were kind of right. Things started dying off then. It was like just slowly started filtering. Hey, you guys aren't alive anymore. The calendar's over with. It's absolutely crazy. I mean, what else could possibly happen? What else could possibly happen? I have a feeling that we're going to watch one of these men that are running for president die of this disease that's floating around, or an actual fight occur between them on September 28th on live television.
I think, well, Biden is too mild-mannered to do that, but I could.
I disagree. He is not.
Bully him.
That guy, yeah, exactly. That guy has that Rust Belt kind of mentality. And I'll speak of a certain example. He was walking into a building a few days ago, and somebody was just yelling at him from a balcony, and he sarcastically quipped back to him, "Don't jump." I mean, the guy has the guy has an attitude. I mean, I don't mind him. I would have preferred another candidate, but he is funny to watch. I mean, do you?
He's from Delaware, which is the state next to us.
Mm-hmm.
Spent lots of time in Delaware. We go to the beach there. So we've been following him for a long time. Yeah, I don't think he's the greatest candidate. I think he's Well, I don't want to say too much, but I think he's a little too old. Um,
You
and
have to be concerned about it, right? I mean, you can't look at him and how he acts and not say, all right, do we really want this person with his finger on the button? But I think what Donald Trump has shown us is that we don't want anybody's finger on the button. We want it to be not
no,
one single person. We don't want this
I would
kind of
rather
power.
there be no button.
Yeah,
No, no.
unfortunately, that's a question, right? Because there's the buttons all over the place. The interesting thing about the button too is that we think of it as a missile with a thing on top of it that makes mushroom clouds, but we actually shoot nuclear weapons in combat all the time. We irradiate bullets. We make them nuclear arms by,
Are you talking about depleted uranium rounds?
yeah, I am.
Yeah, those had some tragic after effects in Iraq.
And nobody talks about it. And there's nuclear weapons all over the place, nuclear powered submarines, for Christ's sake. I mean, that in itself, whether it shoots bullets or a nuclear missile, that's a nuclear weapon. And
Yeah,
nobody talks about the actual uses that we're putting forth with that science. So the finger on the button is kind of ridiculous because we're using that button all the freaking time in various nefarious ways
mm.
that'll impact the future going forward. Um, so I mean, I just like it's funny how Bush showed us how the presidency can kind of corrupt everything. It's not just an equal hand in the governmental process,
Well, corruption is as old as politics,
right?
and probably predates politics. Um, if you look at chimpanzees, they sort of cheat each other and
Oh yeah,
hide things from each other and steal.
and it's base stuff, right?
Birds do that. Squirrels do that.
Squirrels, everything does that. This is just a great point I heard in a podcast just the other day. If a piece of fish, a fish swimming around the coral stole a piece of fish from another fish, you would not think bad for the fish that lost its food. You know what I mean? It's just
Yeah,
a normal natural cycle. But if you watch a boy rob a man of his watch, you're going to think, oh, that's wrong. That shouldn't happen. That boy shouldn't get that man's watch. But in the grand scheme of things, that watch is no different than that fish's piece of food.
yeah.
That's
Well,
what
we've
we do.
decided as humans to create this thing called civilization with rules and laws, and so that we can live together without killing each other.
Yeah, so we can concentrate on other things. We can actually build something better, which is our job, right? To increase our knowledge, to make things incrementally better for the next generation.
Right.
Um, just unfortunately, over the last 140 years, we've done a lot of advancing very fast and potentially might have destroyed everything. I don't know if there's any recovery. 2020 is kind of showing us that maybe we went to that tipping point
Yeah.
and went over the other side of it.
Well,
Um,
my daytime job is I work as a climate adaptation analyst now. So it's different from the prior jobs that I had, in that I'm working more on national scale and global scale policy questions having to do with climate change and how to adapt to it. But uh, it's every time, every piece of scientific information I see, every time I see a paper come out, it's more dire news. And if you watch what's going on, fires, and fire frequency increasing almost exponentially, like in terms of acres burned in the US and Australia and Brazil, and
oh,
the rapidity with which glaciers are melting, and the ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica are melting. It's all pretty scary.
it's very interesting also if you think about the fact that they're not spinning it as, hey, look, guys, the world is falling apart because we're using fossil fuels or we're causing the climate to rise. They're spinning it as, hey guys, look at this great violence that we can watch happening. There's a huge fire happening here and the firefighters are putting it out. Nothing about climate change, nothing about curbing behaviors, nothing about technologies and advancing civilizations so we don't have to be doing this to ourselves. I found it really interesting. I love the fact
It's
that you
very
could be,
sad.
no, it's very sad, but it's very interesting that when the lockdown happened globally and everybody was in their homes, a lot of the problems kind of started to show that we could influence it in the opposite way very quickly.
Right,
Right.
we can. Although the way it happened isn't sustainable, and that we can't completely shut down the economy and be able people need jobs to put food on the table. So, but it shows that if we are determined, we can make a transition, just like we put people on the moon, just like we've done a lot of other amazing things.
Excuse me.
We can beat this problem. All it takes is political will and the money. Which is, again, is political will. So I read. I do not like reading U.S. media or watching, and I don't watch TV news at all. So, though I read our local papers, but that's about it. So I get my news usually from the Guardian and the BBC because they're not based in the U.S., so they don't have a built-in bias.
I think it's absolutely 100% impossible to watch the news and actually glean any information. I look at history, right? I look at the books in the last 5 years or so that are being written, and then I go, okay, this lines up with what I'm seeing already. Is people are, sure this is happening, but nothing that's coming in the news is anything more than just kind of like a continuation of the story that's already being told. You know what I mean? If it doesn't make sense, that's because they're telling a lie. You know what I mean? It doesn't match the narrative that's already being formed. I mean, as a writer, you have to appreciate conspiracies. Am I right?
They make good fodder for thrillers.
Right. But it's very interesting because if you look at 9/11, you could easily say, what's going on here, because the narrative historically is different than what's actually being presented. If you look at terrorist attacks, you see the terrorists rise up and say, we did this, we knocked down these buildings, we killed this person, we did this thing, we're the winners. And then 9/11, there's not anything like that. So like there's a gap in the historical narrative where you're like, okay, where is the terrorist group that's taking...
Didn't Al-Qaeda take responsibility for it?
No, and they didn't do anything like that as far as I'm aware. There was no like teleconference like the USS Cole, where there was a table and a flag and they were cheering and saying, we did this is our planning. I think there was a conversation with Obama at one point, not Obama, Jesus Christ, Osama bin Laden, where he said something along the lines of, when they send their bombs, we'll send planes into their buildings or something along those lines. There's some kind of interesting statement that he made, but he never said he actually did this, like he masterminded it. And then, I mean, you just wonder at the end of the day. You wonder, was it the Saudis trying to control oil prices? Was it the Israelis trying to keep the Palestinians from having statehood? Was it, the Russians trying to incite some kind of ruinous...
I think it would be too risky for the Israelis or Russians to do something like that, because if any evidence pointed towards them, and it's very difficult to keep a secret like that. Eventually, probably someone would find out, and they would feel wrath like they'd never seen before.
Well, that's the most...
I don't think Israel would...
I think that's the most interesting part, though.
Best friend into their worst enemy.
Because you read the history of Afghanistan's war against Russia, and you know that Obama, geez, I almost did it again. Osama bin Laden was actually in the employ of the CIA, receiving training others on how to use munitions that we gave them to beat the Russians. And then fast forward, not even maybe a decade and a half, 15 years. As an old man, I'm 43. 15 years isn't very long ago. I just graduated college 15 years ago. It's like a nothing situation. Here's this guy who just knocked down our buildings, who has a clear connection to our government. There's the history. You can't erase it. There are so many documents that point to it.
That's yet another example of why poking around in other countries' internal affairs will almost invariably come back to bite you.
Oh, it is. Yeah, exactly. You have to take blame, even as a citizen. Even if you're Israel, you have to take the blame, because you know that you have been favorable. You have favorable opinions to, what other countries are doing, other places that cause hornets' nests to rise up. What they were doing with, oh God, who is the political group in Syria and Libya?
ISIS?
ISIS? Isn't ISIS? No, that's the terrorist
ISIS
group.
or ISIL?
No, they're the ones that actually run, like, I shouldn't say anything if I don't know the name, but I mean, they're at war. Israel's at war with other countries in Syria and whatnot, and that war causes problems, right? I mean, that war causes problems globally. It causes terrorists. It causes boys to grow up without fathers or mothers.
So to go back to the idea of concentration of media and so forth, a lot of that comes from, so something that when I first started writing the first book, Sleep State Interrupt, there was all this controversy over the FCC eliminating net neutrality, which is it's the principle that internet service providers transmit all data equally instead of intentionally favoring some websites and content over another. And unfortunately, Obama's FCC changed their position and decided that it should be, the internet should be regulated like any other utility, like electricity and water and things like that, because people need that for the internet now, for jobs, for education, for information, for buy things, all sorts of things. And then when Trump was elected, he installed a former Verizon lawyer who immediately overturned it. So, which makes this whole dystopian thing possible of big companies like Verizon and Comcast and AT&T being able to dictate what people see and hear.
On a mass scale, though, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
very interesting how they do try to challenge the narrative globally or even nationally. Did you read Andy Weir's novel book? What was it called? Artemis, I think it was called.
What was it called?
Artemis, the most recent one that Andy Weir wrote.
I have not read that.
He's a great science fiction writer. If you read The Martian, that same guy,
Yeah.
highly recommend it. But he made a comment in that book about economies and how economies could grow so big they fracture. You know, they become tiny, tiny little economies. And those economies work just fine within their sphere of influence. And I think in terms of information, it works the same way. Like if you individually seek out truth, it's individual, isn't it? I mean,
Right.
your truth is going to be biased regardless of how much the national or global media try to influence that.
But try to get that information out to other people without a major backer or having the bandwidth. That's Whaley's issue after she loses her job, is so she tries to tries to work as an independent journalist, like selling stories to e-zines and blogging, but she can't, but because it becomes a near monopoly, no one will buy anything by her, and she can't get an audience by blogging because she can't afford the bandwidth, she can't afford advertising. So that's how this one company, MediaCorp, ends up, they control the narrative because no one else can, they can say what people, what content they'll show and what they won't show, and they'll charge, and you have to pay to play.
Pay to play,
If
yeah.
you're an independent voice and you're
Right.
someone without any money, then your voice is not going to be heard.
You can cheat as an independent voice, and then they call you
Yeah.
out. Like Alex Jones, I don't know. I don't like Alex Jones. Most of what he says sounds
He's
completely
crazy.
ridiculous. Yeah, it sounds completely ridiculous. But here's an independent voice that can scream on the top of his lungs and reach an audience that is just unbelievable. And they try to knock him down. Joe Rogan's the same way,
Yeah.
right? He's an independent voice.
The trouble is that he tells lies like that about the Sandy Hook massacre
Yeah,
being a false flag operation when
irresponsible.
these kids did die. That's awful.
But as a human being, do you want to know that people think that? As a human being, do you want to know that people are sitting in their living rooms and they're thinking, you know, man, what would be weird is if the government wants to take our guns so badly they'll pretend to kill these kids or something
Uh,
along those lines. I mean, then you could start to formulate logical thought, like that doesn't make any sense. And you could start filling in the blanks. Why does
Well,
that
see,
make any
if he were to speculate it and say, well, maybe what
It
might the
doesn't,
government do, and do
yeah.
just make it
But no,
clear that he's not, that he is making this up and not trying to present it as fact. That's the problem when, so
but
that's
he's a
all,
storyteller.
but
That's his
he's
job.
lying, he's presenting it as fact.
But I think it's my job as the individual, and I think it's
Yeah.
everybody's job. And I think in terms of like effort, sometimes people just don't put forth the effort to look deep enough to figure out why things are the way they are. This story doesn't make sense. Why? Because kids got killed because of a crazy lunatic who had access to guns,
Well,
who drove
sadly,
over, and that's what doesn't make sense. That's the illogical part. But the mind goes, no, 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 no. These kids can't be dead. There can't be some lunatic with guns. It's got to
they're
be
trying to
something
make
else.
sense out of something that makes no sense.
Exactly, right? They're trying to make sense out of 9/11. 9/11 makes no sense. That
Well,
people would
sadly,
sit.
the world doesn't make sense all the time.
Well, that's the point. And then people want it to make sense. And they don't want to look at the logic. They don't want to form a story that says, I'm a bad guy. Because 9/11, yeah, man, 2,000, 3,000 people died, 200,000 civilians around the world, millions of people, whatever. But at the end of the day, the policies that caused the anger necessary for those hostages to take those planes and do what they did came from our pockets. You know, when we buy a bag of gum in the store, a little bit of change goes to the federal government, and they're able to do things to make people angry enough to slam planes in the buildings.
So what
Abnormal.
Whaley ended up doing, so she can't get stories out, and she can't get her information about Media Corp's their conspiracies out, but she sees this ticker that this hacker put into Media Corp's, like this message
Mm-hmm.
he put into this ticker on their news that says zombies roaming downtown Washington, D.C., all citizens urged to take cover, something along those lines. I can't remember exactly how it goes. And so she realizes that I don't have to go follow the normal rules. I can work with this hacker and some other hackers and get my message out that way by hacking MediaCorp's broadcast signal and getting it out that way. So that's what they decide to do. And of course, it's much harder than she thinks originally.
Like that's the interesting thing to me is about this whole thing, right? I mean, she is gleaming information off the internet. Everybody else has the same opportunity, and that's the only information available, really. Run from this area. She has the option not to do that, and she goes the opposite way, and she learns something, whatever. She doesn't want to know, right? The truth is dangerous. The truth is ugly.
And then she and her friends find out how dangerous it is when they broadcast it. That they make some very powerful people very angry. So that's what the second volume is all about, is the Wrath of Leviathan is, so Leviathan, based on the Thomas Hobbes book about the state, and the state needing a state that's all powerful and able to take care of people, and because Hobbes thought that people were at their heart brutish animals, and they had to be controlled by the state, which is completely the opposite of the way Whaley, her ideology, that people should be able to
take care of
control their
themselves.
own lives.
And that's an interesting point. I mean, the government shouldn't be trying to help people live their lives better. They should be facilitating their equipment necessary to live a good life. You know what I mean? The education that comes along with that should be the most important part, and continuous and forever. Like,
Yeah, I mean, the government can be, it's just like any other tool. It can be a force of good or evil or both.
You know, it's really fascinating to me that that the government is trying to stop. Oh, did I lose you? Did I lose you?
No, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you broke up. It's really interesting to me that the government does want to lock down the internet. And it's kind of like a war against a cloud of gnats. You know what I mean? You just can't do anything about it. You swing your fist as hard as you can. the gnats just still are there forever, and the information never goes away. As ridiculous, I mean, I don't, believe me, I was not on a plane on 9/11, nor was I in a building or on the ground in New York. I do not know exactly what happened. I only read the first few chapters of the 9/11 Commission because it was so bad. You know, you can glean information from all over the place, but the narrative, buildings fell, people died. It's really
Yeah.
freaking sad and horrible. But there are other ways to look at that event, and people do look at that event in different
So
ways.
the after 9/11, the government instituted these
Patriot Act.
vast, like all these different operations to comb through people's accounts and
Yeah.
spy on
Find them.
everyone. So they called it total information awareness, and so that information was leaked by Snowden eventually, but they took advantage of this attack to create this all-seeing state that could watch what people were doing, and that's pretty scary. That's the sort of thing China and so Russia doesn't. I guess Russia's doing that now, but so China is sort of the master
Yeah.
of doing that.
Think,
But
I
the US
think, I
is
think,
is
I
like
think,
been edging in that direction, and that's something to be concerned about.
right? I think Russia has their own internet now. I think they're completely cut off from the world. As far as
No,
what,
they're not. They're not.
they're,
They're not cut off.
they're not completely cut off.
No.
Ah, man. I mean, the future is a scary place if you allow it to be scary, right? I mean, it's like, I wonder, because there's 30% of people who don't even have jobs right now, or food, or anything, and the government's kind of arguing about what kind of assistance they're going to give, in the hopes that if they don't give any assistance, that people will be able to, pull themselves up by their bootstraps or whatever. And it's
Well, that's what McConnell thinks.
what bootstraps though? You know what I mean? If you think about what a bootstrap
Right.
is, are you actually talking about a noose? Because there's no bootstraps left. All the jobs are being given away. Human slave, the fact that there are slaves in this country still today is a very interesting conundrum as well. Nobody talks about it. People don't have power because people have no money. People have no power because they have no education, or they're exhausted, and they're being
Right.
exhausted by the fact that they feel like failures. How come you can't get a job? How come you can't buy a house? How come you can't have a family? How come you can't do the necessary things to make yourself look good? It's just not there. There's no economy. There's a blank slate. Get a good degree. We'll give you loans until you graduate, but then we're not going to give you real jobs, because that debt's important, right? They want you to default on that so they can sell it over and over and over again. It almost becomes more valuable defaulted on than an actual thing that they can collect money for.
Yeah, so when there's a financial crisis, the big banks get bailed out, but normal people don't get anything.
Nothing. We don't get bailed out. I don't know. I mean, this is a fascinating conversation. You're a great person to talk to you about this stuff. I mean, are you in the process of writing something now, or?
I'm trying to finish that satire, local government
satire
that I've been working on.
Is it just because is it just because fiction or the nonfiction's like so bizarre now that, because this would be like,
well, I write nonfiction as part of my job, so I don't want to do that. I don't want to have two jobs that are the same, and I enjoy writing fiction, and I like exploring fictitious people because I can get inside their head and really explore how they react to extreme pressure.
Yeah.
Like,
we're all under extreme pressure right now. It's crazy.
How they react to being chased in a surveillance society where everyone and everything is under surveillance. There's cameras everywhere. There's everything on the net is watched. And how are they going to escape a dragnet? And how are they going to, in the Wrath of Leviathan, some of the characters, there's mercenaries sent after them. How are they going to survive that? The final book too, they're being chased. There's a huge manhunt So how are they going to accomplish their missions without being caught first? And how are they going to, and when you have a bunch of people, even if they're boyfriend, girlfriend, even if they're family, even if they're friends, this kind of stress brings out interpersonal stresses and conflict between people. And that's something I like exploring also, is how, interpersonal reactions are affected by external stress.
It's interesting because you talked about the hero's journey when we first started this conversation,
Right.
and a hero in Joseph Campbell's model is called to do what he does. He's a small person, he's a tiny person, he's a person with no power. He's got nothing to look forward to but tilling the fields or mining the coal or whatever.
Well, it
And
depends. Oftentimes they're princes or knights or something.
well, I mean, there's somebody who's given a mighty task that really dwarfs them, right? And
Right.
right, and I mean, if you look at our world, nobody seems to have picked up that hero's journey. We don't have a Martin Luther King, right? We don't have a Malcolm X anymore. We don't have these shining examples standing in front of us, kind of guiding us towards the
But
direction that'll give
there
us
are lots
utopia.
of them. There are lots of them out there. In Baltimore, there's a girl in high school. Her name is Destiny Watford, and she led this fight against a trash incineration plant in her neighborhood, just south of Baltimore. It's an industrial neighborhood, and of course they're poor and they're African American, and they get all. So what better place to put a trash incinerator? Right next to a bunch of schools too. So she led this fight. She was a high schooler, and they won. So there's a hero's journey. Greta Thunberg. That's a hero's journey where an ordinary 15-year-old girl, now 17, taking, like, saying to the UN and world governments, calling out their bullshit, that they're just making noise, and their bureaucratic way of solving problems is solving problems one meeting at a time.
One meeting at a time, like one bad pollutant
one
person.
meeting at a time. So, rather than solving problems. And I know lots of people like this, like friends Kevin Cease and Margaret Flowers, also from Baltimore, who have been fighting against U.S. wars abroad, and they were pretty instrumental in getting the Obama's FCC to recognize that the internet, that we need net neutrality. I mean, a lot of others did that also, but they went out and out to his house and kept going out to his house, the commissioner's house, and saying, "Look, this is important." So,
that's just so interesting, though, right? You can use these people for your own narratives too, right? So I mean, say you're a trash place, you can use somebody who's actually making noise to say, hey, I am making a difference, and you could show what difference you're making by guiding the narrative they're arguing for. I mean, are they really a shining light of heroism? I don't know, because these heroes that we're talking about that actually do something, they take bullets, don't they? Isn't that the name of the game?
And there's no such thing as a perfect person. Everyone has flaws. And
well, I mean, we don't want to say we don't want to say heroes. We don't want to say heroes they get hurt. I mean, they do something so bad against the thing that they're fighting against. They don't recover. They sacrifice. They are ruined over their activities. They are ruined for the rest of their lives. And unfortunately, we're talking about Mandela, right? When he goes to prison for what he felt. I mean, we're talking about somebody who doesn't exist for us, because if they are in prison for something they heroically fought for, chances are we didn't even hear the full narrative. We heard what the prosecutor wanted to charge them for, but they're there locked up in prison, probably going to rot the rest of their lives. Potentially.
In the trilogy, in the first book, Sleep State Interrupt, so Whaley and her friends make terrible sacrifices in the course of their mission. So they lose their house, they lose their friends and family. They are on the run. They pretty much lose everything. But that's it was a sacrifice to bring about something.
That's a great call, isn't it? That's a call to adventure because, I mean, the thing is destroying their house. And by destroying their house, they're thrusting that hero out into the world to fight this thing they didn't ask to fight, who brought the fight to them. I mean, that's perfect. That's Joseph Campbell to a T. I mean, I just get frustrated thinking about the reality of our world, though. Is there somebody out there thrust into this horribly unholy fight?
They're everywhere. There aren't enough though. There should be more. If
Should need it, right? We should need
but
it.
there
We
are
go,
people. Look at all the people that have been out in the streets
yeah,
protesting police
brave,
killings.
brave, man. They
It's
arrested
been
people in New
enough
York.
to create
It's
a tipping
horrible. Yeah, it's horrible. They arrested people in New York during the
point.
protest and they locked them up in the jail for 3 days with no due process. Locked
Yeah,
them up. And then you wonder why there are no more protests in New York. They destroyed the protests in New York by,
they did that to uh, the Occupy movement also, like
yeah.
Occupy Wall Street. And they just sent in the police and bulldozers, and so
I don't know what it takes.
that's
Because I mean,
the
you can't lead a war from prison. You can't lead a war from a jail cell. Martin Luther King proved that, right? He wasn't leading. He got arrested many
well,
times.
yeah, but he wrote things. Mandela wrote things. Mandela was still communicating from prison.
And now it
Uh,
doesn't matter. Everybody's writing on the internet, and like we already talked about, it gets pushed down. It gets pushed down.
so yeah, so speaking of um, police and the justice system, one thing I found out some interesting things about the federal so-called justice system while doing research for Wrath of Leviathan, which is the second book of the trilogy. Um, so in the federal system, defendants do not have a right to a preliminary hearing like they do in the state system. The government opts for a grand jury indictment instead, which is basically a rubber stamp. The defense can't even take part. They're not allowed there. Grand juries indict almost 100% of the time, unless it's a copying indicted, in which case it's 0% of the time.
I know.
And then the federal government has a 99% conviction rate. And then
Yeah.
there's mandatory minimum sentences and no parole. The
No
judge
problem.
sets the rules in the courtroom, and depending on the judge, they can be very harsh. So it's like a kangaroo court.
Man, and one other thing you didn't mention is they don't have to share your mugshot. And the one thing that they used to take a mugshot for is to show the world they had you so that there was no questions about where you were. You know what I mean? With this Ghislaine Maxwell situation, that was the one piece of information that kind of filtered to the top for me. They did not share her actual mugshot because they don't have to. It's not a
Right.
rule that they have to follow. It's messed up. And you wonder, how can you fight against a system like that that can say whatever it wants about you? It
So
can dig
Bob
it.
Barr, Trump's toady attorney general,
Yeah.
actually tried to end habeas corpus as an emergency coronavirus and
Sucks.
and protest movement, which they call terrorists.
That's a terrorist act. That's
And
the
so yeah, so fortunately, Congress called him out on it. Even the Republicans in Congress said, "No, no way, you can't do that." But that shows you the mentality of these wannabe dictators. That if it were not for the legal checks and balances that we have in the U.S., it would, we would be in a dictatorship long ago.
I think we are, but we just don't know who
As
is ruling
bad
us.
enough as it is, like I was talking about the federal justice system, that's bad. That
It's
needs
bad. I
serious.
mean, the local guys are the same way. I mean, you take a poor guy from the country and you charge him with having a pound of marijuana. I mean, it doesn't matter what he says.
Right.
It doesn't matter. He's done. I mean, he's
Yeah,
screwed.
he's going to get a public defender who's got like 100 or 200 other cases and doesn't have time to spend on the case.
You take a kid from the Bronx and you say, hey, is that a joint? Here's a ticket. Go see the judge. That kid doesn't show up to the judge. All of a sudden, 10 years later, he's on parole. You know what I mean? It's like that's how easy it happens. it's like the criminal justice system is really, really not. It's dystopic.
I think they should focus on real crimes, like, violent crimes, and then that, uh, and then I would include violent economic crimes by, someone steals $10 million from their, embezzles $10 million. That's something that needs to be.
Yeah, that should be that should be impossible to do, right?
Yeah.
You should not be able to embezzle $10 million. There should be bells and whistles flying all over. This guy put $10 million in his bank account. Find out where it went or where it came from. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, if you are a police officer, I think your job is to basically soothe the community and make it better. If there's a pothole, that's your job to make sure it gets filled. You police that. You police why that teenager robbed that convenience store. Dude, are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Why are you shoplifting? Let's fix this problem. Where are your parents? Let's find out. The investigations just don't seem to happen. This kid is done. He's a piece of shit. We're going to throw him in jail. That's done. We're done with this guy forever. And that's usually what happens.
They would need money for social workers to do that. And police departments are, so like any bureaucracy tries to accumulate more money, power, and resources toward itself. So police departments have, expanded their realm of responsibilities to include all sorts of things like social work, that things that probably should fall under the leadership of psychological workers, and
I think that's the problem, though, right?
And social workers and things like that, and
they're already doing the job, though. They're working as social workers, aren't they? I mean, they're working as anti-social workers. Honestly, they're creating potential workers, potential thinkers, potential artists, potential whatever have yous, and destroying them at a young age. Whether or not it's their father or their mother or somebody's going to get criminalized, and that child is destroyed. And right there, that's our society. You can't remove enough people to have it actually affect for good. I mean, it's just it's a nuclearized weapon. It's a bullet. It's a whatever have you, right? I mean, it's like every time you do it, you destroy a little bit of hope that we could have. I can imagine. Man, so what a fantastic conversation. What do you think? Do you have going forward that people should be aware of?
So the final book of the Better World science fiction techno-thriller series, Zero Day Rising, is coming out on October 1st on C# Press. You can find it at all the electronic Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all the other outlets like that. My website is tcweber.com.
Okay.
And you can find the links to all those books there. My other books hopefully will be coming out soon. The one, Born in Salt, which was the one I was talking about the FDR being overthrown in a coup and U.S. dictatorship 50 years later. That's in COVID limbo, so I'm not sure. Whenever the coronavirus ends, maybe